Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Transnational Perspectives. This is the More Than Human podcast. You know, the show where we put nature in focus while we cultivate global perspectives on society and culture across environments and landscapes. I'm your host, Josh Bennett, and these are Transnational Perspectives. So, if you're just joining us for the first time, or if you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening, whether it's on your podcast player or via our YouTube channel. And you can also stay up to date with us during the podcast, before, after, between podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, or just shoot us a good old-fashioned email if you want to contact the show or get on the email list. And of course, if you're enjoying this podcast or you find it useful or interesting and you think that maybe other people would too, please share it wherever you can and keep on spreading that word. And I see some people have been doing that, because I have to say it's pretty amazing to just in the first few episodes to watch this community grow. I can see so far that we have people all around the world on like many different continents listening to this podcast. Some places I've been before, some places I haven't. So let's just go down the list of all the countries we've been listened to, where people have been listening to us already. So right there at the top of the list right now, it kind of shifts back and forth. I can see how many people are listening in different countries, but we've got the UK. I've used to live there, as well as Norway and Germany, all places I've lived before. So that's interesting. Maybe people I know, maybe people I don't know. Australia, we've got quite a few listeners over there. Finland, Ireland, Austria, Sweden. Okay, a lot of neighboring countries here towards Norway. Then going down south a little bit, we've got Moldova. Interesting. Spain. I would like to go there right now. It's probably a bit sunny. South Africa, been there before. Wow, that's really far away. Brazil. Yeah, Paula, I think I see you there. Switzerland, got some friends over there. Czech Republic, Mexico, my neighbor to the south in the United States. Lithuania, been there many times. Botswana, have a feeling that might be MJ. And Luxembourg, Singapore, Jersey. I'm not talking about New Jersey, I'm talking about Jersey. And I feel bad. I mean, thank you, whoever's listening in Jersey. I had to look this up because I was like, is that really like a registered country? And yet not New Jersey, actually Jersey, just right there between England and France. And of course, last but not least, there's a lot of listeners in my home country of United States. This is super cool. Everybody knows how I love transculturalism and transnaturalism, and I can see that we are transnaturally spreading all over the place. So that's great. Let's keep it up. Let's keep sharing. Let's keep getting the word out. Keep that feedback coming. Been getting a lot of great feedback from listeners. And if you want to get on the show, you can give me some feedback about that too. Now, speaking of United States, we have a great guest from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado today, way out west where it's best, I guess. Deb Matlock is here, or virtually in the studio. Deb's been a nature-based spiritual arts practitioner and environmental educator for over 25 years. Deb currently teaches environmental education at Prescott College in Arizona, or virtually, as well as Deb is a coach and workshop organizer facilitating courses on animal communication, shamanic style journeys, and nature connection through her spiritual guidance practice called Wild Rhythms. You can find out more about that on her website, wild-rhythms.com. And oh, did I mention, Deb is currently working on her Ph.D. in environmental education. Deb's got a lot going on, so I'll let her express more about that in our conversation, because she can do it better than me. I would just like to thank Deb for taking the time out of her busy schedule to visit me in the virtual studio and talk to us about some of the subjects that, to be honest, I don't know so much about. So you're going to hear me ask a lot of questions in this episode of things I just have no idea about. And I think especially these ideas of spirituality and animal communication and how you mix this up with outdoor education and environmental education, how this all works together. I haven't been so familiar with these terms, so I learned a lot, and I hope you do too. And if you know about this stuff, I'm sure you will enjoy it from a different perspective. Deb really has a lot to offer, so I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to the conversation. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and see you on the other side for some reflections. So thanks so much, Deb, for coming on the show.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I actually woke up and thought, oh, yay, we're doing that today. So
I'm just asked, so am I right? You're in Colorado right now?
I am. I'm actually just between Boulder and Denver and the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So yeah, okay. It's my homeland.
Yeah. And this is where you grew up.
I grew up in Golden, Colorado, and I've lived in many places in Colorado, but my heart is definitely in the Western United States and in the Rocky Mountains. It's kind of the landscape that formed me. You know, I love all the places all over the world, but this really feels like home to me. So, well, because it is, I guess.
Yeah, and actually, that's I'm sad to say it is one of the only places in the United States that I haven't been to, Colorado, and it's a place that just calls me. It just looks and feels amazing. So tell me a little bit about it, like, because you said the landscape really formed you, and yeah, I mean, how so? Like, what was it like growing up there?
Yeah. Well, as a kid, we used to go camping all the time. That was our family vacation. And so multiple times a year, we would head up into the mountains and spend sometimes 10 to 12 days at a time just being in the mountains. And what I learned was just so much about the wildlife and the plants. And I feel like now it's, like ponderosa and lodgepole pine trees kind of feel like friends, because as a kid, I sort of grew up with them, and aspen trees and how they quake in the wind and all of these things that just sort of really settled deep within my being, and the rhythms of the Rockies and the cycles, some of which are pretty rugged and pretty aggressive. I mean, we've had a pretty fire-ridden summer, as much of the Western United States has. And, it's not all hearts and flowers. A lot of people like to say the Rockies are the playground, and I can't stand that. It's not a playground. It's a very real, dynamic, living landscape, but just very inspiring and very, just deep. There's a lot of different action that goes on here. You've got rivers and creeks and high mountain above tree line, and then we've actually got out to the prairie here, and so there's just a lot going on. And I love all that. I love how all that works together and how those cycles and rhythms impact us as humans, because we are, of course, are natural beings. And so.
Anyway, I'm just curious when you say that. I haven't heard that before, but I'm originally from Florida, so I don't know so much about what's going out in the West area. When people say that it was the playground, and you said, that's you don't like it when people say stuff like that. What do they mean, the playground?
Yeah, this is one of those states, well, probably all of the West, really. It's year-round recreation, which is great. Definitely not knocking that, but people often come with, we're going to rock climb, and we're going to extreme ski, and we're going to mountain bike, and we're going to forget that we don't have enough water, and that it does, lightning is a big issue in the summer, and, altitude and sun is so bright here. And, there's all these very real things that are not about being at Disneyland. And so one of the reasons I work as an environmental educator, I have for about 25 years. And one of the reasons I got into that was because I think it's important that we really understand our landscapes and understand how to be in them in a way that's respectful and safe also, because, we don't need to be rescuing people off of rock faces because they didn't bring the right gear, but that kind of mentality leads to a lot of that. So.
Yeah. Do you see that a lot? I mean, I sometimes like to use this term, the charismatic super activities, where people are really, it's kind of like the shiny objects, or, the bugs flying into to the light, so do you see that? Do you see that a lot in like advertising, or is that how a lot of people perceive Colorado?
I love that charismatic mega activity. Is that what you said? That's a really
the charismatic super activities.
Activity. That is great. Yeah. I do think there's a whole lot of that. There's a lot of that in the culture, but also definitely in the advertisement, and and then there's a lot of the counter to that. There's a lot of people who are very responsible recreationists, and a lot of people who are very conservation focused. And a great example is, we've got a lot of 14ers, which means mountains above 14,000 feet here. And they're very heavily climbed. They're very, very, trash, and the impact is pretty great. And we've also got organizations that, like Colorado 14ers Initiative, that organize a lot of cleanup and conservation efforts. And so, it's a good balance. I think that's one thing that's really great that I've noticed, is that there's for everybody who says, I'm going to go up the 14er and take a selfie and leave my trash, there's 5 other people saying, oh, no, that's not how we're doing it, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've definitely seen more and more in that over here in Norway too. Of course, it's becoming a bit more popular these days. I mean, Norway's always been kind of a bit more of a secret, third tier kind of place for tourists to come. And of course, this year, not counting this year, because this is totally anomaly of a year. But in previous time, we saw more and more people kind of flooding to these very specific places. You have this whole entire giant country, and they were just all being funneled into like these certain fjords and stuff like that, and tons of like tons of like garbage appearing, and like just traffic jams in the mountains where there shouldn't be, and all kinds of stuff. So I mean, we definitely, I can feel you on that. And then of course, I come from Florida, and it's that we don't, I won't even get into, that's a whole other episode, but with Disney World and the Everglades and everything. But so you said that you've been working as an environmental educator for over 25 years. So give us a little insight into that. What does that look like where you live in Colorado?
Yeah, it's a career field that pulled me before I even knew what it was called. I just wanted to do work to help people connect to the landscape and be more comfortable and with wildlife and more respectful. And then I learned it was actually a field. And I started as a volunteer naturalist with the city of Fort Collins. And I thought, well, let me just see what this is. And do I actually like leading people on nature hikes and planning programs? And so I started out as a volunteer, which quickly led to grad school and a whole focus of working with different organizations, state parks, national parks, nonprofits, private nature centers, schools. I ended up starting a business. I've done a lot of work in the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education, which is our statewide organization focusing on the professional development and opportunities for environmental educators here. And it just became my passion. I think I very quickly realized I had found my home, which was this field that I didn't realize existed. And it's since become, a larger understanding of what that field is. But back in the day, it was just like, oh, you mean people actually do this for a living? Cool. But it's been a really rewarding career path, and one that I have no intention of getting off of.
I mean, for you, what does it mean to be an environmental educator?
Yeah, it's different depending on where people live, and also to practitioner. In fact, I teach a graduate course right now on environmental ed. And one of the assignments is for people to come up with their own definition and relate it to the field. But the way I look at it is it's helping to nurture not only environmental literacy, but deep relational connection between people and place and all the beings that live in those places, for the purpose of people seeing themselves as ecological beings, and then seeing themselves as part of a vast and expansive, complex world that we live in, ecologically, speaking. So
where are you teaching at?
Yeah, I actually am an associate faculty at Prescott College, which is in Arizona. And it's a low residency program, and they have an environmental education focus. And I work with environmental educators and outdoor educators, and, people who are looking to really kind of hone in their passionate vision for this kind of work. So that is one of the things I do. Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of different hats, and some days I have to figure out what hat is it that I'm actually wearing in any given moment. But such is the nature of the field as well, I've learned. So.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is really, I mean, it's a bit of a tricky question. Sometimes I like to ask people these questions because it's so hard to define. It's saying like, what does it mean to be an artist? People, I think, and you can tell me if you agree or not, but I think a lot of the time when I tell people, oh yeah, I'm an outdoor educator, and they think, oh, okay, that means that you are like a kayak guide or something like this, or you're a bicycle tour guide, which I do these things, but then there's all this other stuff going on too. And sometimes it's not even related to any specific practice whatsoever, but just, how you're approaching things. So do you see in your classes where you're teaching with kind of like emerging environmental educators, do you see any like consistent themes coming up, or like concerns that a lot of your students have? Do you see any like consistency there?
Recently, I would say there are some themes that are starting to develop. One of them is diversity in the field of environmental education. And really saying, how do we create programming, that is responsive to where people are, and who they're working with and who they are and what they can offer, and just kind of looking at the whole shebang there of, it takes all people on this planet to care about the planet, and it needs to be a field that recognizes that. And I think that's really shifting that way. I think another big theme I've seen in recent years, I've worked with graduate students for about 13 years now, and I see this not only with my students, but also with my clients and my own business, is people really yearning for understanding what does deep nature connection mean. It's one of those things that, depending on who somebody is and what their experiences are and where they live, that can look very different. But I feel like across the board, I'm seeing an uptake in the yearning and the desire to understand that and feel it and experience it, which is really exciting to me. That's kind of where my heart has been for all of these years. And I think, that was a trend happening. And then I think with this pandemic hitting in and people getting basically locked down wherever they were, I've also noticed an increasing interest as well in getting to know the places where we live and finding the deep connections and the sacred connections and the sense of being part of the natural world right outside of our doors, and not necessarily in some exotic location or some place we only visit once in a lifetime, which of course has value and can be very incredible. But that isn't what sustains us day to day. And that isn't what gives us that sense of who we are and how we live in this world on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think there is sometimes this idea that, you need to go far away, you need to travel someplace to have some kind of natural or deep experience. Well, I know it goes by different names in different places, but how would you wrap up your idea about deep nature connections?
That's a good question. I think, the first piece is it depends on the person. I mean, some people want to take that to very deep, super spiritual places within themselves. They're moving in a very philosophical kind of sense of that connection. Other people, it's in a place that's just as valid, but they may want to really understand the migrating birds that move through their area. And they might really want to understand the cycles and the seasons and how they can best garden because they really feel like they want to grow their own food. Or, I think what I love about this work is that there is no right or wrong. And that it really is saying, okay, as an individual, where do I feel called right now? What do I feel like is my connection? And how do I want to really develop and nurture that? I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is one of those things that is very personal. So and I think this is also the trouble that a lot of, let's say, like educators or policymakers or people who are trying to explain to their parents why they're going to go study environmental education and what that means. It's hard to get all these messages through because it is this thing that in a way, it's completely not abstract. I mean, there's nothing more natural than human animals being in touch with the rest of the surrounding environment. But strangely enough, we have become very disconnected from all of this. So, and that's why it seems interesting to me. Yeah. So seems to me you focus a lot on this nature connectedness. And I mean, I see you're also working in a lot of different you're a teacher, a professor at a university, and you're also working with people through your company, Wild Rhythms. And then you're also working on some Ph.D. work. So we'll kind of walk through a lot of that. But how do you see it for example, in your university courses, when you're teaching these up and coming environmental educators? Do you have an example of like how you facilitate some kind of activity with them, or what are they doing to get in touch with the nature, or get connected with the nature experiences?
One of the things I do in all of my courses, because I teach at a distance, and so I'm not actually in the classroom with students, so we're not actually able to go out on a outdoor adventure together or anything.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool because one of the things that we can do is bring our places in. And so we've got people from all over the place bringing their places to the course, it's been fun. If somebody lives in this country or this state but I have people, no matter what the topic is, find an outdoor spot where they can visit throughout the course. And I highly encourage them to take their reading out there and journal and like the discussion questions, for example, online. I encourage people to think about those first while they're outdoors, while they're doing something, while they're sitting, get away from the computer, go be in your places. And then depending on the course and what we're doing, I think there's a lot of value in saying who is in my community, what is happening in my community, how do I really make this a community-based course without it just being a computer-based course? And so my philosophy has always been that the computer course shell is just like a little landing spot. It's where you get the next assignment. It's where you turn stuff in. It's not where the learning happens. The learning has to happen with the world, and the earth has the most dynamic of teachers, and people have to get outside to do that. And sometimes it's more challenging than others. And of course, at a distance, I don't have control. So it becomes very much student agency here. Students have to decide to do that. I'm not going to know when I'm reading their paper if they sat there and did that inside or outside. But I also tell my students, the other reality of learning is that we have to take our own responsibility for it and make it the experience we want it to be. We can't have our hand held, especially not in grad school, for Pete's sake. Yeah.
Got to do it on your own this time, kids.
That's right. At some point,
So do you notice any, I'm just curious because it sounds lovely to me. It sounds like something I would enjoy doing if I was in your class. Do you notice, and I imagine others do too, do you notice any issues? Like, do you get any feedback from students? They're having trouble doing stuff like this?
I haven't, and it could be that the college where I work is very much an outdoor adventure ed, environmental ed focused college. I mean, people really go there with that as one of their, that's one of the areas where they attract students. And so by the time somebody's in one of my classes in environmental education, they know what they're getting into a little bit. They've probably worked in the field in some way or another. They have already an attachment to it. It's not like right out of high school, let's see what this is about. Typically, these are people who are typically saying, I'd rather, ready to develop my career a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because it sounds like a lot of people already have experience with it. I was thinking of something kind of funny that I've dealt with quite a bit is especially in the transcultural outdoor situation where depending on, why you're getting people together to have an activity or something like that. Sometimes we'll get people from different parts of the world and depending on where they're from, it'll be like camping. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I want to go camping? Or we had we do these studies, like you say, where we would, sit down at wherever, like at a park or something. And we had some people responding, I see all these people running around in circles around the lake again and again and again. And I just really don't understand. Just like back where I'm from, running is something that you do when you're in a hurry or a rush to get somewhere, and I know. So I think that's something really eye-opening and also important to remember is that depending on where you are from the world, this whole idea of getting connected with nature and, could really depends on where you're from and your culture that you grew up in. We had a lot of situations, for example, when I worked in a camp. I worked at a summer camp for people who were coming to Norway and they were coming through refugee integration programs. And we would have to do all kinds of stuff to accommodate people of certain religious backgrounds that would seem kind of strange in other types of situations. For example, like beaches, the women have to go here and the men have to go there, but then there would be another group that everybody could be mixed, and we're all in this kind of same outdoor experience, but everybody has to be mixed. So I think this is going back to what you said, a lot of your students have interest in diversity, especially now. And it's just, once you start working with a crowd of people that are from all around the world and you find out, separating people on the beach would not be cool in this situation, but in this particular situation, it's totally normal, so, and we're both doing the same kind of outdoor activity.
Actually, that reminds me of a story. I was part of my doctoral work. We were doing some farm work, volunteer farm work, a service kind of exchange up in New England. Mm-hmm. And there was a person in the cohort who was from the South in the United States, and she was African American. And she said, this is not the kind of outdoor activity that I would bring to a program where people have very recent relatives with a slave past. Mm-hmm. We're working in a field for free is not the kind of nature connection experience that she said would be most resonant with her audience. And I have to say, it was really eye-opening for me because I that isn't my background. And I thanked her for telling, for sharing that, because it was just one of those moments of, you're exactly right. We have to look at who we're working with. What are their backgrounds? What are their interests? We can't make assumptions about our audiences. I certainly can't assume that everybody in a certain place isn't going to want to work on a farm or not. But, being sensitive to those issues and pulling ourselves out of our own little myopic experiences and saying, okay, how do I make this experience, wide enough that people can find their place in it in a way that's authentic to them?
Yeah, it is very interesting, and I think like a emerging topic in all kinds of studies, but especially as we just become like minute by minute more and more globalized, we start to think, a lot of the roots of like, traditional outdoor education and this kind of stuff come from places like England and North America, and even in that case, like there's a lot of like colonial connections there. I guess we're becoming more aware of this. I'm a little curious since you brought it up. It's a nice segue into my next genre. Like, so you're doing a PhD right now. You're working on this. What is this about?
Yeah, actually, that is a nice segue because it is about. I am really passionate and interested in people's experience of communication with more than human. Mm-hmm. And then the secondary question for that is, and how do those experiences inform our work as environmental and humane educators? And one of the reasons I'm really passionate about that is I feel like that's a voice that we don't often bring to the table. It's not honored. Even in diversity conversations, that is often not part of it. What about the other voices that we live with every single day, all the non-humans? And what does it mean to communicate? I think over the years, I've worked in that with lots of clients. I work as an animal communicator, and I do a lot of workshops on deep and sacred nature connection where we explore this. And over the years, I've seen almost as many ways people communicate with the non-human world as there are people. And so I've really loved watching that. And I think that what I've seen almost consistently, though, is that it's not an experience people will acknowledge or recognize even in all cases. And if they recognize it, it's often followed up very quickly with, oh, but I'm sure I'm making that up, or there's no way that really happened. There's no way that bird and I just had that interaction, And what I see, though, is this, not only is it just, it's like, well, but why couldn't it be a possibility? Humanity multiculturally from the dawn of humanity was having this very animate, interconnected relationship. And it is a very recent slice of humanity that says that that's crazy and nuts and that we can't do it. So the data is there, the experiences are there, but what we need is cultural acceptance of those things. And so for my doctoral research, I'm looking to interview people who have self-identified as having had interspecies communication experiences with wild nature. And then from that, I'm hoping to sort of look for themes and ideas and contexts that I can then apply to the field of environmental ed. Specifically, the body of work, Wild Pedagogies, which I know you mentioned is how you and I met, which is, I think, a very exciting piece of the educational world where the more than human voice is kind of front and center and is considered a primary teacher. And so I'm locating my doctoral research within Wild Pedagogies and specifically saying, all right, we've got this whole world talking all the time. There's a lot of voices here and they're not all human, so let's get past thinking that we can't communicate.
This is super interesting, the road we're going down now, because I have a few terms I'd like just you to clarify, because I think some people listening might not have heard these terms before, or like understand them. So what do you mean by animal communication or whatever the phrase you use, the animal communicator? What do you mean by this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you and I are talking right now. We're communicating, even though we're on Zoom and we're all these thousands of miles and hours apart, we're communicating. And so animal communication or nature communication is what about communicating with our dog or our cat or the lake or the tree? The mountain, the sky, that kind of thing. It's how do we extend that faculty of conversation that is so natural for us as humans outside of our own species and open ourselves to the possibility that we could potentially be communicating with all these other beings as well. So that's I hope clear. Is that kind of clear?
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, it makes a lot of sense because I've thought about this kind of stuff before. I'm just wondering, like, do you like in your research or like in your own experiences, do you have some examples you could throw at us?
Yeah, I think some people, their experience, it feels like they'll see images. It's kind of a telepathic imaging where they'll be walking, say, through a forest and they'll notice a tree and they'll take a moment with that tree and they'll start to see things. Some people, they hear things. It's very audible. Some people, it's a sensation or some kind of an inner knowing, and kind of every spectrum from it, that can be within those things. Those are very generalized. I have one person I know of who she feels like her communication comes out in her artwork. So she, for example, might go on a hike or spend some time outdoors and then, begin to create a painting or a drawing from that. And she feels like that's how the communication happens. I think for some people, it can be dreams. In fact, I've talked to a lot of people where they'll have this dream and they're thinking, well, wait a minute, I saw that elk when I was out there the other day, but suddenly now I'm dreaming about elk. And, again, it's very easy to say, well, that's just because you saw the elk and it's a coincidence and yada, yada, yada. And I just feel like let's be open to the possibility that it's more than that. We don't have to, go to the point that I think skepticism is really important in this kind of work. I think it keeps us humble and it makes us question and deepen our understanding of things. Mm-hmm. But I think the openness is what is really important. And just also the opportunity to honor our own experiences. Like if somebody feels like they have a deep relational connection with a bird that visits their backyard every day, why the heck not honor that and let that experience be more valid than any voice in our head saying, there's no way that matters.
Where did this, back in your history, where did this begin? This interest in the animal communication?
Yeah. Actually, I think it started from day one. And as a child, my first best friend was my dog named Jenny. And, that was my playmate. She was and I communicated with her all the time and had no idea that was anything that I shouldn't be doing or, and also the landscape and the wildlife. I felt like it was just sort of a natural way of being. And I think that for many kids, that's the case. And then what happened to me is also what happens for many folks is that I started to get older and I got into my teen years and I started to get a little bit insecure about the thought that I was hearing voices in my head and that must be insane. And I don't want to be that person, and I don't want to go there. And I'm not going to acknowledge this anymore. And so I tried to shut the whole thing down and was pretty successful. Well, I shouldn't say that. It kept coming at me and I kept fighting. It was like this inner clash for the late teens and early 20s. And then finally it got to the point where my experiences outweighed my ability to negate them. And that has become actually one of my primary teaching philosophies when I work with students or when I work one-on-one with clients who are developing the skill for themselves is like, let's really get into your own experiences and let those be front and center, because I think that those are the parts of us that say, this is my natural way of doing this. This is what feels right to me. This is how I've had the most meaningful, encounters. And then into my adulthood, it became kind of re-owning, further developing. And then honestly, there was a big chunk of time of having the courage to share it. I didn't want to be out there. I thought I was just fine doing, leading public nature hikes for the city of Boulder or whatever it was, I didn't want to come out of the, shadows, so to speak. But again, the experiences and the experience of others really was part of what pulled me as I was seeing really organic things happening with people on the trail, for example, and programs where that was not the focus. I led a program once about the natural history of black bears. And, I remember a woman saying to me, I really feel like I have so much in common, like I could almost talk to these bears. And I was like, okay, Deb, let's get over our fear of anybody thinking whatever they think, and let's just move on here. And let's start opening up the conversation. And what I have found since then is that I'll do a presentation somewhere, for example, and people will literally pull me aside afterwards and pull me into the corners to share their stories of interspecies communication. And some of these are, top field biologists who have said to me, there is no way I can share this professionally. I would kill my career. And I'm thinking, all right, well, these stories have got to come out. We have got to get to where that doesn't kill somebody's career.
And is that related to some of your research that you're doing right now too, is getting these stories out? Is that part of that?
Actually, yeah, that is probably there's kind of two parts of my mind. One is getting the stories out, and I hope to put them out in the world in a way that is very accessible to mainstream, not buried in some journal where nobody without a certain academic connection can access it. But getting the stories into the culture and just letting people see that, this is not crazy, and maybe giving people just a little bit of a support and inspiration to honor their own experiences. And then also from those saying, what can we as educators pull from these stories to build into our own programs, to just create the opportunity, if it's right, if the moment, is there for people to have their own experiences that way.
So through your research right now with these stories, do you have a plan on like how you want to present them so they are more accessible outside of the academic field?
I'm still working on that. I mean, the first part of my plan is I am planning to write the dissertation as a few different articles, and having one or two of those articles not be geared towards academic journals, so that I can look for other ways to publish them, whether that's, blogs or magazines or pieces where it's a little bit more accessible. I'm also, planning on, I'm sure more ideas will come, but, workshops and presentations and, speaking, for example, on podcasts, where are the places that the stories can come out and be shared a little bit, just to try to increase the audience globally, just to say, hey, pay attention to what experiences, we all might be having individually, because, I think that kind of stuff could change the world. What if we started listening to all the voices? Oh my gosh.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that real quick because I have some more questions I want to ask about that. But before I go off too much, can you tell us a little bit about how this is connected to Wild Rhythms, your company that you have?
Yeah, so Wild Rhythms, I actually created that about 16 years ago because I started to see, like what we were just talking about, people having these really incredible experiences on programs. But I was always working for organizations where I couldn't go there. For example, when I was working for a government institution, it wasn't like we were going to suddenly start talking about communicating with trees. That wasn't going to go very well. So I created this as a container to be able to offer the work and to be able to work kind of co-creatively with the world around me and just say, okay, what kind of programming should I offer? What do I want to do here? There's a part of me that, the spiritual connection to nature is really important to me. And it's been a hugely formative part of my own life. And so being able to share that with others is what Wild Rhythms is all about. And I do that through individual work and through group work. And this year, honestly, it's been amazing virtual group work, which I never thought would be as cool as it's been. I have to say that's been a silver lining, is that I'm going to keep that as part of it, even once the world is a little bit more open again.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I do think that it's something about, even though as outdoor people have a lot of emphasis on the importance of being in touch and being person-to-person contact, person-to-nature contact, there's something interesting and kind of special about doing these online conversations too, because I feel like it, in a way, makes people more accessible in some ways, and can kind of hang out. You don't have to get on the train to go somewhere or get on a plane to go somewhere. It's like, we're just here hanging out in our pajamas or something.
Yeah. And I led one workshop this year that I basically adapted a field workshop to virtual. And we started out with a Zoom call in the morning and a Zoom call in the evening. And in between, people went out and did their own nature retreat. And what I found was the incredible sharing of all these different places and all these different experiences. It was really fun. We we had 3 different countries represented, and, we wouldn't have had that kind of connection if we all had to be in person in one location. So there's pros and cons to both, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is a new and interesting dynamic. At first, when this whole pandemic thing happened and all these courses were going online, I thought, what is this going to mean for outdoor education? But now that we're talking about it, when you come to think of it, for example, when you go on, I know this is a big issue with, going away to camps and like long adventure programming and stuff like that, where, you go off on this journey, you're kind of in this like special bubble for a while with all of the other participants or something like that. And then you come back to quote unquote reality or whatever, and the real world. And then there's this kind of letdown, and then there's all this stuff. So it is interesting because with this kind of online integration into your daily life of, getting education from different places. I mean, online education is not something completely new, but with this idea of outdoor kind of nature connections and whatnot, it is, it's almost localizing it even more in a way, because we don't even have to like gather together at a center or something like that. It's just like, okay, here's your assignment. Go outside, come back later, tell me about it.
Yeah, and what I've heard from people is I've literally heard people say things like, I had no idea how much wildness was right here in my neighborhood, which just makes my heart burst open. It's just like, oh, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of validity for us seeing the wild world everywhere. And seeing nature as everywhere. Nature is not a wilderness area or something remote. Nature is everywhere.
Wrapping it back to your wild rhythms, I'm just a bit curious, a few things before we go deeper into that. This word spiritual, because I think this is a word that means a lot to a lot of different people. So what does that mean for you in the context of your practice and like what your clients are coming to experience with you?
That is a great question. That is right there with environmental ed in terms of people defining it their own ways. And for me, it means, spirituality to me is how do I dance with the mystery? This incredible, great mystery that is life and death and suffering and joy and all the things, the mystery of the spirit world, the mystery of all of it. To me, I think of my own spiritual journey. It's how do I dance with that? How do I locate myself in that dance and stay open to the questions of the fact that it's going to be a mystery until I die. Like I fully know that. In fact, I bet it'll be a bigger mystery as time goes on, because that's what it keeps doing as the years go by.
What are some of the offerings that you have if somebody's interested to come get themselves connected with the nature more?
Yeah, I kind of divide it in my mind, individual and group offerings. So individually, I work with people. I do shamanic style journey work. I do animal communication. And those are both, people with questions, or they're looking for guidance or wisdom around certain things in their lives. Those pieces are quite rewarding and fun. I also have a mentoring program, which is an intensive for people who are wanting to deepen and learn those skills for themselves. I have several clients who come saying, they want to learn to really develop their ability to do nature and animal communication and connect with the spirit world and sort of sense themselves as part of it. A lot of people come to me with that, and they're also looking to build, work, or they're looking for the next kind of step in their life. And then I also do workshops and presentations and, retreat type things. And so, field-based workshops. I love doing presentations for groups. And as I mentioned a second ago, this year I've moved some of that to an online format, which has also been really fun and rewarding to, figure out how to adapt things to have that different audience. And then I also do some program design consulting stuff with organizations who are looking to bring more of this deep nature connection work into whatever they're already doing. And so sometimes I'll work with groups and just look at what they're offering or help them create some new pieces, or I'll do some staff trainings for their educators or their, volunteers that can bring some of these pieces into their programming if they're interested.
Whoa, that's a lot of stuff. So, okay, let's back it up for a second. So shamanic style journey work, what is this? It sounds so interesting.
This to me is right in line with the nature communication piece. It's like speaking with the spirit world, whether that's the spirit of a tree or our helping spirits, or however people want to kind of look at that. And everybody has a different way of viewing that, and it's one of those things that, again, is intriguing to me because it's multicultural and it's across humanity and across generations. But the idea that we could interface and get guidance from the world of spirit. Some people consider, ancestors. Some people look for animals they have a deep connection with, or places they have a deep connection with. And so to me, it's all very deep, sacred nature connection work, but it is also a very spiritual path. And, it's one of those paths. I've had clients who were from various religions, from various philosophies. It's not a religion. It's not a belief system. It's about people's experiences. And, if people feel like they are connecting with the world in a certain kind of a way. And so that's, the word shamanic is one of those general terms that I believe had its roots in Mongolia, and it had roots in a really, subjugated way where if I understand correctly, it was anthropologists kind of putting that phrase onto people. And it's one of those terms that's very loaded, and it's been claimed by groups and not claimed, and denounced and not denounced. But the way that it looks to me is it's sort of become a very general term across many different cultures to mean that walking between two worlds, interfacing with the world of spirit. And I've seen it used by religious organizations, for example, and I've seen it criticized by other organizations or groups of people for whom it wasn't even one of their historic words. It's become this crazy word, but what we don't have instead is another word that isn't a little bit loaded. And so, that's why I call it shamanic style, because it makes sense to people. But what it really is about an individual's organic experience with the world of spirit.
So, but with this shamanic style, I mean, what was your experience getting into that? Like, how did you find your shamanic style?
Yeah. Again, similar to the animal and nature communication, and because they are so closely related for me, I think this was happening my whole life. As a very young kid, I remember talking and hearing voices, and when I started to think, well, this is obviously not healthy, I have to stop this. And, it didn't stop. And so what I basically had to do was realize that what was already happening naturally had a name and had a thing. And where I discovered that was when I was in graduate school. I was doing a research project on the rhythmic connection between people and place. And I was looking at that through dance and drumming and cultures that lived with seasonal rhythms and moon and all different rhythms. And what I quickly realized in that research was, as I mentioned, across cultures, across landscapes, there was this dance and rhythm that people would do for the sole purpose of communicating with the world of spirit. And I remember sitting there reading a book. It was dark. I was in my kitchen. I was buried in books, and I went, oh my gosh, so this is really a thing. It's not weird. This is a thing that happens all the time, all over the world. Holy cow. And then that was the beginning of my journey also to like where it is today, where I work with folks. It's like, I want to help people honor this experience for themselves, if that's where they feel called, if that's what they feel is their path. And, if it's not, that's cool too. But for the people for whom this is their path, finding a really organic way to pursue it is important. I think the other thing that's happened in this work is that it's become prescriptive. There's a lot of how to do shamanic journeys where it's like, here's the one way you do this thing. And, honestly, that's not the experience I've had or all the people I've worked with. It's just like with the animal and nature communication, it's about us finding our own path and letting our experiences really speak.
So I from what I understand, there's no one way to have this shamanic style journey work done, but is there something that, like somebody that calls you up and says, okay, Deb, I want to work with my shamanic style. I want to go on a shamanic style journey. What could one expect, at least from getting started, to get into the prescription process?
Yeah. If somebody's brand new to it, the first thing I would recommend is that we actually do some sessions that are not mentoring sessions where I'm not helping them learn. I'm just doing the session. We're talking with the spirit helpers. We're getting some guidance. They can sort of experience what it is and how I do it. Does it feel resonant with them? And then if somebody wants to be in the, says, yeah, I do resonate, even though how I do it isn't really important because we're going to be working with their experience, they still need to resonate with just the way that I work with my own helpers. Oftentimes it'll start with, depending if there's some emotional or some stuff we have to work through first. A lot of times we have to kind of claw through our intellectual mind a little bit and get to where we're dealing with that inner critic a little bit so that we're prepared. Sometimes it's about our rhythms. It's literally about slowing down and calming down. And for some people, that's the starting point, is to say, okay, what are the circumstances where you feel the most open, say, for example, to talking with the spirit of the forest? What are the ways that naturally happens? And for a lot of people, it's slowing down. It's stepping away from our rhythm of our email and our work and our traffic, And so when I lead workshops in this, one of the first things we do is the consciously work with getting our rhythms to match where we are and not where we came from, which for a lot of times is traffic getting to the trailhead and then trying to find a place to park and, all those things, and then the other piece is that, I always work really closely with clients at the beginning and say, tell me about the experiences you've had. Let's just start there. What are the little bits of this and tiny pieces of things, whether it's a snippet of a dream or you find when you're dancing or bike riding or, and let's start to pull together your own palette. And let's start with that. So instead of saying, here's, lesson number 1 of our curriculum, it's more like, let's start here and let's invite those experiences and the world of spirit and the earth right in right now. Oh, I love that. That is on my bucket list, is to see the Northern Lights. I have never seen them.
I saw them about 2 or 3 years ago in Lofoten, in the Lofoten Islands up in the north of Norway. I've been here for 6 years, and that's the only time I saw them was a couple times while I was up there in September, actually. So if you're ever in Norway again, go up north in September because it's really nice up there because it's still a good amount of light during the day, but it gets dark enough at night so you can see the Northern Lights. So it's really cool. Yeah.
Oh, that is on my list for sure.
and it looks just like this actually, but again, it's kind of one of these funny things, like what we started talking, not to change the subject, but I'll get back in a second, but like we were talking about earlier in the show when we were talking about these charismatic super activities, and the industry for coming to see the Northern Lights here is out of control. I mean, there's no way you can predict it. You can predict it, but there's no way you can guarantee that you're going to see the Northern Lights. It just has to be like one of those things that happens while you happen to be there. But there's all these plane trips and helicopter rides and just all this crazy tourism going up to based around the Northern Lights. So it's a crazy part of the tourism industry here. I
can see that. And I can see the hard part if somebody has this trip of a lifetime and they don't know for sure they're going to see them. That's pretty stressful for the outfitters.
Yeah, exactly. For me as a tour guide, at least before the pandemic, there's no more tour guiding anymore. But I'm based in Oslo, so we would just have tons of people coming through all the time. They're in Oslo for like 2 days, 3 days, but then they're going up north. They're going to go see the crazy fjords and the Northern Lights. And they're like, you think I'm going to see the Northern Lights? And I'm like, it's the middle of the summer. Like there's no darkness there. And then even during the dark of winter, you can never predict. Although if you go up really, from what I understand, if you go up really in the deep dark of winter, it's pretty guaranteed they're almost every night. Yeah. So. Wow. Yeah.
Oh, that's so incredible. I mean, what an amazing phenomenon. I just think that is so completely beautiful.
It's surreal. It really is. It looks really just like this background looks. It's really wild. It's lots of wild rhythms up there.
There you go. Right.
Are you a shaman or have you learned from shamans, or is this more of like a different kind of concept? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I had my own experience from childhood, but I also apprenticed for about, 15 years and still work with that person. I feel like this kind of a path, whether you call it shamanism or whatever else it is, I feel like, it's a lifelong ongoing path of questioning and learning and deepening, and so to me, I feel like there's no destination to it. I hope that when I'm at the end of my life, whenever that is, I'm laying there with more questions and answers, and I'm laying there with a whole lot more experience than I have today, things that I couldn't even imagine. And that's how the path has been so far. So, I feel like, I call it shamanic practitioner work because but for lack of a better phrase, I think that's where the nature-based spiritual arts practitioner came from, is that it kind of pulls in so many pieces about all of the work that kind of comes together, from the environmental ed to the spiritual wisdom gathering to the nature communication to the more than human voice, to all of that piece. To me feels like a spiritual art form that kind of transcends culture and transcends, it's for each of us to find within our own deep connections.
I really like this phrase you've come up with, which is nature-based spiritual arts practitioner, because when you break it down, it actually can make quite a bit of sense. Maybe if you say something like, I'm a shaman or I'm a doctor or whatever, people say, okay, what is that? That could be many different things, but this is actually makes it much more specific. Was your experiences with this and your mentor, is this rooted in any particular landscape or region or cultural background?
Well, that the idea of nature-based spiritual arts came to me from my helpers. And I would say my own personal experience of it was definitely born here in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, but what it really comes down to is deep sense of place, deep listening, deep connection, and the ability to do that wherever we are and deepen our connection. I mean, I have one client that I work with who is basically nomadic. She moves around quite a bit, and her career field is she leads outdoor deep immersion, 6 weeks in the woods kind of things. And then she lives out of a van for the other part of things. But her sense of place and her deep connection, she's able to sort of find that wherever she is. I have somebody else who feels like, she's been in one place for her whole life, and that's where she's like, this is where it is. It's this place. So again, it's that individual journey. But this work, I feel like for myself, was born out of my own relationships growing up. My own ability to stay open to that as I've dealt with the cultural challenges as an adult. And then my deep desire to help people find that for themselves and in the places where they are. And it's nothing wrong with going to locations. For example, I cherished my time in Norway last year, and I actually still have pictures of the glaciers on my computer. It was deeply effective, but it's also a place I may or may not ever be again. So that can't be the only deep connection place that I have, because that was 1 week out of my life. And so that's where my passion and my calling comes in, is saying, what would it look like if we found our deep connection wherever we are all the time? What would this world look like if we lived like that?
Yeah, it goes by many different names. I like this one. I've also, there's a much more like, I would say probably like educational term, which I always liked, which was like the adventure around the corner. Or when I was a kid, you might even remember this. When I was a kid, we had a magazine in the States called Your Big Backyard.
Oh, I do remember that. I had that.
In a way, it's kind of, this is kind of what we're talking about here, because I grew up with that when I was a little kid. Maybe that's why I'm here still talking about this today, is this idea of just like, what's happening right outside your window. Everybody wants to go. I have to, I want to get spiritual. I have to go there's nothing wrong with it, but I want to go all the way to India and sit on the top of the mountain and at the highest peak and meditate so hard, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not accessible. It's not accessible to everybody. It's a big grandiose, this image, these kind of big, what do I want to say, like side of the road advertisement, what you see on the front of a magazine or something like that, when you can find it right in your own backyard.
Yeah. It's like here in the States, we have dandelions, and they are considered invasive. They're also medicinal and edible. And I can say in my mind, a dandelion growing up a crack in the asphalt in the parking lot in the middle of Denver is so much amazing sacred energy, that is so easy to walk right past. But here's this plant surviving in this crack in this hot black asphalt with sun beating down all day long and limited water, and yet busting out with flowers everywhere. It's like, we can have those pinnacle experiences, but you're right. They're expensive. They're not sustainable, and they aren't where we live every single day, but that dandelion and the crack in the sidewalk, we might see that being every single day for a whole season, so let's have those relationships too, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. This is also really great arguments for like urban outdoor education or urban environmental education, because, again, there's a lot of focus. I remember I was talking to somebody from Australia, and they were saying, we remember we used to take the kids 6 hours away to go kayak down a river. And then we realized that well, maybe we can just take them surfing because we live right next to the beach, but it wasn't surfing at that point in time. I don't know, but it wasn't considered this like traditional kind of outdoor activity. You've got the climbing and the hiking and the, kayaking, canoeing or whatever. And surfing wasn't considered this kind of archetypal, outdoor activity. And then they started this whole surf program and all this surf related, shore related stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's just about kind of shifting your perspective. I'm curious too. So when you're talking about where you got a lot of influence for your shamanic practice, you talk about helpers. So what are these helpers?
Yeah, I can answer that from my own experience. And it's some of my helpers are human form, some of them are plant animal form, some of them are energetic. I definitely feel like connection with ancestors and deceased animal companions. And, it's very varied. And in my experience of it, I've had helpers for different reasons. Some of them work with me primarily with clients. I have one, for example, that helps me with schoolwork, my dissertation. It's like having my own dissertation coach in a way, because, it's just sort of looking at that wide range of those deep relationships, kind of that interface between the physical and the spiritual world, which personally I think is constant, and it's very fun when I work with clients to, be with them as they're kind of connecting with their own helpers and their own relationships. And I've noticed over the years, my helpers have some of them have stayed on, and I've had some that have come for a period of time in my life and then kind of disappeared, and they may come back, they may not, so it's been a very lively and vibrant ongoing relationship that, again, this is where I think the experience that people have individually is so important, because I could share what my experience exactly is. And if somebody else's is a little different, does that make them think theirs isn't valid? Or does that make them think theirs is, what we need to do is say, well, this is kind of how it's worked for me, but let's work together and figure out how this works for you. And that's the part that I really love doing. And that's why it's not prescriptive in my mind. It's not like it has to be this way and you have to go meet, one animal that, it's not how it's worked in my experience.
And are these so these experiences that I guess you could say you're helping facilitate these journey experiences? I mean, do you have particular methods or like tools in your toolkit? I'm just thinking because I think when a lot of people hear like shamanic journey, you're thinking a lot about, and we could reinforce this, or maybe this is different. We think a lot about, for example, I went and did a field work in Ecuador in like the jungle maybe 10 years ago. And we were anthropological field school, and we were doing a lot of research and living with this tribe in the jungle. And I lived with the shaman. And I mean, when I was there, we did a lot of like certain rituals. There was certain plants and certain like all kinds of things you eat and places you go and animals that you talk to in the forest. And I'm just wondering, is there do you have like a toolkit or certain like methods that go along with this practice? Or is it something similar like that? Or is it completely different for everybody, or like how is this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think it's similar and different. In my work, what we worked with is the helpers. And so, for example, if somebody signs up to do mentoring program, the first few sessions, I'm usually doing the journey for them, and we're talking to the helpers about where is this person's starting point, combining that with their experiences they have, if they've had any. There are definitely some tools, certainly for people to go try to, like I mentioned, if they want to communicate with nature spirits or something, to slow the rhythm and the deep breathing. And some of those things are I would say almost universal. I would not say 100%, because I've definitely met people for whom that wasn't their case. But, some people really resonate with a much more kind of regimented approach, where other people it's more fluid. So yeah, there's a whole lot of ways people can try that are very general, that are not culturally specific. So we're not stealing any rituals from any. In fact, I actually think that the deeper we each have our own connection with nature, our own connection with our own spirituality, there's like no need for stealing ceremonies from some other place or other person, because our own stories, our own rituals, our own ceremonies will be, kind of organically coming up in our lives. And I feel like it's a really lovely way to say, the deep spiritual connection and deep connection to nature and a communicative relationship with the world is everybody's birthright. How that looks, whether it's a ritual or a ceremony, that is where we get into needing to be careful, I think, with this kind of work, because, we don't need to take some kind of ceremony from some culture that is completely different than where we are. And I think that that's also where people can find their experiences helping them to teach that. But yes, when I'm working with somebody and they're wanting to sort of get in it, it's a very much like a mentoring model, where we're working with where they are and what can I offer and what can the world offer, and kind of creating that individualized experience for those folks. Yeah.
And then are there like certain like rituals or something that you're engaging in to speak with these helpers and interact with them?
Yeah, I can speak to my experience, which it's a little different. It depends, if it's a very deep journey that I want to do for myself that is on a very, say, emotionally or very stressfully charged topic, or I just feel like I really want to get into deep space and hang out there for a while, I will do more to prepare. Yeah. I may dance, I may, listen to some calm drumming music. I may do more. If it's a journey, say I'm working with a client and it's going to be, an hour or so, I do some preparation work, but not quite as elaborate. It depends. And also sometimes I'll have client session and I will actually hear my helper say, you're going to need to be more prepared for that. It's going to be an intense session, which is great. Cause then it's like, okay, I need to make sure that I schedule that where I'm not bumping right up against it with something else. But my own process can include dancing and drumming. It can include just relaxing in a hot bathtub or hot spring. It can include, for me, I would say generally speaking, I do need some space away from the rhythm of email and that kind of this sort of thing. On the days I'm meeting with clients, I don't schedule trips down in Denver where I have to drive in rush hour traffic to and from, because it's like that's going to make it harder for me to do this. And part of what I love about working with clients is helping each person find what their piece is. I have one client for her, she has to be moving or walking. If she lays down, like I like to lay down to do this, if she lays down, she immediately falls asleep every time. But if she walks and she gets into a groove, then so for her, that's the way she's doing it, and that's where I love the individual part of this. If she was in an environment where she was told you need to lay down and cover your eyes with a cloth and you have to do this, it probably wouldn't work for her. And then she would, in fact, I know it wouldn't because she had tried that. Would she be leaving disempowered, feeling like, well, then I don't have a connection. I don't have the ability, which that is like, that just gets me really, no, everybody has the ability for a relationship and deep spirituality. Everybody, it's just being open to what that is.
Yeah. So sometimes it takes a little extra work.
Yeah. And I think focus, like I've mentioned that this stuff happened to me as a kid naturally, but I will say that once I started to get aware of it, I consciously worked to develop my skills and to refine them and to deepen my connection, and all of those things, that was something I have done and still do. I still work with myself and my helpers and just, all right, how do I keep deepening this work? How do I keep it growing?
It sounds like a lot of people are coming for a lot of different reasons. Do you find a lot of people coming, for example, to come there for like mental health reasons, or maybe they were perhaps like diagnosed with something and are looking for some kind of different types of ways to get their mind in shape?
I have some clients that definitely, when they're looking for kind of spiritual guidance or spiritual wisdom, some of them are perhaps working with a therapist with other things. I would definitely say this is not, at least in my experience and the way that I do it, I don't let it be a substitution for mental health care, therapeutic work. And in the animal realm, I won't even work with people if they have a health issue with their dog, for example, if they haven't gone to a veterinarian first. Okay. It's like we can do this as a complementary piece to behavior work. Really solid, beautiful, humane-based dog training, for example, can be supported by animal communication. I do a lot of end-of-life work with people and their animal companions where, we're supporting the work they're doing with their veterinarian and kind of helping with a hospice approach to it. But it's really important to me that we live in both worlds. We live in the spiritual world, but we also live on the earth. And sometimes that means we need to go to the doctor for ourselves, the vet for our animals. Sometimes it means we need to pick up the trash on our trail and not sit there and pray about our nature connection at the trailhead. Maybe that day we need to go out and clean it up. So I feel like one of the things that is exciting to me is how do we balance all of this so that we're living firmly on this earth in our physical realities, and also allowing the spiritual part of our mystery, the dance with the mystery, to be also really an important piece of it. That more than human voice, how do we let that be part of it?
Speaking of the more than human voice, when it comes to animal communication, can you just give us a little tease of like what that work looks like? Give us a little bit already.
Yeah, I will say in my experience, the way that I do it is it's very much like a shamanic style journey where, I will speak with the animal, a spirit, if the animal's open and available to that. Spirit helpers often help with that. And, the animal, oftentimes the animal guardians will have specific questions or things that they're wanting to explore. I also like to leave it very open for what the animal wants to share. And so, so that it's not just us coming in to grab and take from, but saying, hey, we're here to have a conversation. In fact, I like to start the sessions with, what would you like to share with us? Anything before we ask our questions, just because I feel like that's the respectful way to do that. And if the animal isn't feeling talkative, then I think the world of spirit can often help. And I've seen that a few times with very traumatized dogs. I do a lot of volunteer work with animal rescue, and sometimes animals that have been through a lot of trauma, it takes 2 or 3 sessions to get them really chatty, but we can still get some guidance and wisdom that can help us to help them kind of land on their feet and move through whatever they're trying to deal with, coming into rescue. And so I really value that piece of it. And that's also why I think it's a good complement to things, because it doesn't mean, for example, that dog coming into rescue with a traumatic experience doesn't need, behavioral support and veterinary support. But having this kind of communicative spiritual support, I think, is a lovely piece and a really critical piece, honestly.
And so it's not always guardians, like we're talking, I don't know the right terminology, like pet owners, guardians.
Right.
It's not always them. Sometimes you're working just directly with, say, the dog or the cat or something like that.
I think that mostly happens with the animals that come into the rescue where I volunteer, for example, where they don't have a guardian yet. And so we as the rescue are essentially their guardian for the time being, and so just trying to say, okay, how do we best help? We don't even do it with every single one of them, but the ones that are really difficult or have had really challenging situations that are really struggling to land on their feet, sometimes it can be a nice helping component. But in terms of clients, I would say, yeah, most of that is, people calling me and saying, like I do, for example, like the end of life piece. It's like, okay, I found out that my dog has cancer. We've got a few months, and I'd like to talk with him about what these months, what he'd like for them to look like, and is there anything else he wants us to know? And over the years, that's really been really interesting for me to watch, just how sometimes what's come up in these sessions has really been helpful, and in times where they've taken things back to their veterinarian, for example, and it's help with that process. But I am definitely pretty hardcore about it, not replacing. And for example, if I had a client, I've had a couple times where clients where the content of our shamanic style journeys has gotten to very deep in personal places, and I've got some contacts of therapists, for example, that understand the work I do that I can recommend to people. Because if it's like, okay, this is now crossing out of this realm and it's no longer spiritual work. Now you are in a place of mental health and I am not qualified there. So I think those are important lines to know. For sure.
I think that's a big thing in general with people and nature, and whether you work in outdoor education or in spiritual nature connections, is there is such a amazing mental health benefit to being outside, being in the outdoors. Of course, a lot of studies being done on that too, and have been done on that. Sometimes nature is the medicine you need, and sometimes not. I was also curious, do you find people, for example, with things like a lot of people have things like ADD, or depression. And I feel like this is something that, could maybe help in these types of situations. Is there some philosophy, or have you seen this work out in your own practice?
I would say definitely, and I think, because we can't separate ourselves from the holistic realities of our mind, body, spirit kind of thing, and earth, you throw that in there and there's a lot of realities swirling together. So definitely, I don't think that it's separate. I don't think that it's something that people don't sometimes come, for example, I've definitely had sessions with folks where anxiety was the topic of the session and how to sort of work with that in a spiritual way, but I'm also really clear with clients that this is what it is and this is what it's not. So that they also are taking some autonomy and agency with what it is that they're looking for too, if they say, okay, yeah, I just really want to look at the spiritual side of my anxiety, great. And I have done that myself with this kind of thing, my own work with my helpers and with my own mentor, super helpful for me over the years with dealing with just the anxiety of being on this earth and trying to process everything that goes on, good, bad, and otherwise. That's a hard road for a lot of folks.
Speaking of which, we got the global pandemic, especially in the United States. I mean, I'm from the U.S., you're living in the U.S., so I think there's a lot of concern in that region right now with all the socio-cultural, ecological unrest, like climate change and corona and inequality and all the civil unrest. I mean,
yeah.
Do you have any words of advice that people could do like today or right now to alleviate some of this stress?
I love that question. I will start with sharing a quick story. So in March, when the lockdown all started to happen and the pandemic was really hitting the States in full force, it was very disorienting and it was very stressful. And I know I had a lot of work just disappear overnight, all kinds of everything, outdoor workshop, everything in person, all of it gone. I was kind of panicking about all that. And then I thought, and I was just like overblown philosophically because I was thinking, wow, this is an example of nature connection on steroids. Like this virus is showing us how connected we are and how it does not matter, how much money you have, what color your skin is. It doesn't matter any of that. Like this is, it matters some socio levels. In the States, there are certainly groups of people and populations, but physiologically and biologically, this virus is not discriminating. And I remember feeling like my feet weren't on the ground. And so I walked outside and it was in spring here in Colorado. And I was just like, I'm just going to sit out here. And all of a sudden it was like robins were building their nests and I noticed spring bulbs coming up. And what I noticed was all of these wild rhythms that are very normal, very reliable and very grounding. And there was a piece of me that said, okay, everything feels really insane right now. However, there's a whole lot of this world that is absolutely still functioning. And, it was just reminding myself that I am also part of that rhythm and that wasn't going crazy. I think we are all as ecological beings, part of the rhythms of the natural worlds right outside our doors, in our homes, wherever we are, so yeah, I would say right now today, once this podcast ends, it's just to go outside and say, what is here that I've never noticed? Who is here that I've never met? I love the question of who is here. Asking that question every time we walk out the door is going to have different answers. And it's so fun because it's like, who is here today? Oh, wow, look at this and that. And, who are you? And, it takes 30 seconds. It can happen while we're walking down the street. It can happen while we're walking between our office building and our parking lot, whatever it is, it allows us to say, oh, we are part of that bigger dance, that bigger mysterious dance of life and death and all of that. And everything is really crazy and intense right now. And that's a rhythm that we've seen in nature too. Nature has big, destructive, changing moments, and then there's life on the other side.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Nature just keeps doing its thing. And and as we are a part of it too. And I also think one interesting thing to kind of come out of all this is that, people are spending, I feel like, a good bit more time outside these days and also in their neighborhoods, more close by where they live. People, I know myself, I don't really want to ride even on the public transportation to go too far. I'm just walking around the neighborhood every day in different directions and it's, but I think you're right. You said it's disorienting when all this happens. Still, to a certain extent, it's quite disorienting, and we have to like reorient ourselves back here. Okay, we've got to do work here now at the home office or something like that. And my region is now my neighborhood. And what can I explore go really deep into the neighborhood and see what's happening here. But
that is, I think, one of the silver linings is that going deep into where we are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both physically, spatially, mentally, spiritually, all of these things. I'll wrap it up right here where since people are spending a lot of time at home these days or, not going out and about as much, do you have any favorite films or books that you would say kind of like resonate with what you do, like resonate with your life or resonate with the kind of work that you do?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, for the book, I would say a blank nature journal that you go sit outside and just record who you're seeing, draw pictures, how you're feeling in the place, and kind of write that book of your experiences with your places. That's what comes to mind. I could definitely think of some more. If you want, I can pull some things together for show notes. And in terms of movies, I think one of the things that I've found myself looking at is just things like Planet Earth, and some of those that just allow me to remind myself that there are so many life forms on this earth in so many different places. And so it's kind of like we're spending time in deep connection with our place and then taking that bigger view of all the amazing, life on this earth. And then that spectrum in between of this is where we live, is in sometimes we're here in our places, sometimes we're off here, but this is the earth that we live on, And so the frozen planet, the planet Earth, all of those kind of documentaries that allow us to calm down our rhythms, slow down our thinking minds, get out of the crisis of whatever it is that we're dealing with, financial, cultural, whatever it is. And remember that we are on this earth with so many other beings, all of whom have voices, all of whom have something to say in whatever unique ways that comes out.
Yeah. And I think there's even, studies that show now that even just by looking at some picture of like a nice outdoor area or, watching some nature video, it can give you these some kind of similar vibes in your brain and your serotonin, so your happy juice somewhere to keep us going through these more indoor times. Yeah.
And it'll throw our rhythms down, and who knows what we'll be opening ourselves up to at that point. If we're like watching a documentary, do we suddenly start feeling like we're talking with our spirit helpers? Who knows, right? But we're slowing our rhythm down, which I think is important.
Yeah. YouTube, everybody. It's pretty much free. And I've been watching a lot of old, like when I was a kid, like old travel documentaries from the 2000s and 1990s and stuff. I'm like, that's what's happening in that part of the world. Maybe one day I'll go there. Anyways, thanks, Deb. Is there anything? I think we'll wrap it up. I could talk to you all day. I have like a million more questions, but maybe we can do that again another time. Any info you would like to drop about how to get in contact with you, or anything coming up that you'd like to tell us about before we go?
Sure. Yeah, I am always happy to connect with people. You're welcome to check out my website, which is wild-rhythms.com. And I also host a Facebook group exploring sacred connection to earth animals and spirit, which you can sign up for through the website or search it online or drop me a note. I'm always happy to connect. I like what you just said. I could talk about this all day, and I'm always happy to connect with people, whether they are looking at doing work together or not. What's more important to me is that people who are interested in this kind of work are feeling like they're not alone. There's a community. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of mysteries for us to dance with, so the more the better.
All right. Welcome to the other side, everybody. And thanks for sticking around. And thanks to Deb for taking a real deep dive on some of these issues that we talked about today. It was a really interesting discussion that I've been thinking about, listening over as I've been editing it and listening again and again. And I've noticed some central themes. There may be a real primary central theme that's kind of tying it all together for me. And that would be how so many people, like Deb mentioned these days, and I think many of us are noticing this, that so many people more and more are looking for stronger natural connections, stronger connections with nature, with the environment, with the natural world, whatever we want to call it. And it goes by many different names, lots of terms, and there's lots of ways to express this. For example, you could take a class on earth house building with cob, or perhaps working in your garden. Or for some people, like we said, they want to do these charismatic super experiences, like traveling to faraway exotic places and jumping out of planes into the middle of the jungle. It could be many types of things. It could be more low-key experiences, which I think a lot of us are experiencing today in COVID times, which is just a little adventure in your neighborhood, a walk around, your street, or maybe going down some streets you haven't been down before, picking some berries in your backyard, or perhaps even snapping photos of little flowers peeking out of cracks in the sidewalk. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting art coming out of this time. And on many levels, many of us are simply just living alongside in commune with nature already. Maybe we're subsistent farmers. Perhaps it's just common in your community to already live in a home made of natural building materials with no class needed. Or perhaps you're looking for something on a more spiritual level. All of these things and more, we're trying to get to the same place, and that's this connection with nature, or the natural world, or our natural selves, or whatever we want to call it. There's a lot of words, it's a lot of phrases, a lot of sayings, and it's a lot to think about, and it can be overwhelming. But if you get this call of the wild, so to speak, there are many ways to access this, and they don't require necessarily a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of status. You can all start right there in your big backyard. There's that word again, your big backyard. That magazine me and Deb were reading when we were kids. It's in your big backyard. Maybe it's in the sidewalk. Maybe it's in the sand pit. Maybe it's right there on your city block. Or really just whatever you got to work with. Nature is present in some form or another. I think you get the point. And luckily, we have tools, lots of great helpers out there, like Deb and others, to guide if you need it. Anyways, I'm going with Deb's suggestion, and right after listening to this podcast, go outside. I'm gonna go somewhere away from the screen, go somewhere nearby, but just a little bit different, and take a break. And I hope you join me in this activity. It's a little change of place, a little geographic perspective can change your day. So I'm going for a walk, everybody. Thanks to our guest, Deb Matlock, and all of her information will be shared in the description below. Thanks to everyone for tuning in today. Please enjoy, share, and subscribe this podcast, and please enjoy, share, and subscribe the joy of life. Anyways, that's enough. I'm Josh Bennett, and these were Transnatural Perspectives. Have a good one, everybody.